Good afternoon. I am Kathy Neifeld. I'm one of the partners with Agency One, and I am thrilled to bring you today a webinar which is going to cover, as you can see on the screen, 3 ideas in 30 minutes. We're going to be discussing SLATs, QTIPs, and concentrated stock. Our featured speaker today is Kurt Kauffman. Kurt is a Lincoln advanced sales consultant who has been guiding financial professionals and clients with their wealth management planning opportunities for 24 years. He has significant experience with trust companies and family offices and holds a BA and a JD from Montana State and the University of Montana. And he also has an LLM tax law degree from the University of Washington School of Law. Kurt has presented hundreds of CPEs and CLEs and is also a published author in the CPA Journal. Kurt, a lot of responsibility now because I've just told these people you know an awful lot and can be relied on. So I am thrilled to introduce you to the advisors from Agency One. We also have a number of our friends with us from Broker Service Marketing Group, and I'm thrilled that they're joining us as well for this webinar. I also want to thank John Kimmel, who is our rep from Lincoln Financial, who helped arrange this call. And as I mentioned, you're going to talk about 3 ideas in 30 minutes. The way this webinar is going to work, Kurt is going to handle each topic. If you'd like, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A and we will try and address the question in real time while Kurt is giving the presentation on that specific topic. At the end of each topic, we'll also ask for some additional questions. And if there aren't any, we will move on. We think that this is going to last about 30 minutes, but the webinar in total should last about 45 because we will do a follow-up sweep for Q&A at the end of the entire presentation. And also before we end the presentation, Lisa Mitchell will get back on the webinar and talk about some upcoming webinars that we have during the month of September. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Kurt. Take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you all for attending today and for having me on. I really appreciate it. This is a new presentation for us, but it's, as you see, there are 3 ideas that we've seen advisors getting quite a bit of traction with here over the last couple of years. And there are 3 things that aren't well known in my experience anyway, and I think you'll find, and I'd like to get some feedback from you at the end along those lines, by the way. And it's using life insurance in places where life insurance hasn't been traditionally used, right? And it is in these 3 areas: SLATs, which are Spousal Limited Access Trusts; QTIP Trusts, Qualified Terminable Interest in Property; and Concentrated Stock Positions, okay? Starting with SLATs. Now, 10 years ago, well, 12 years ago, you never heard about SLATs. And I'm from the trust world, as Kathy noted. Why are we hearing about it now? Well, it's right here. In the last several years, we've seen the exemption from estate tax climb from when most of us started into business, it was what, 500, 600,000, 675,000 when I started here. We've seen that climb to 15 million. So, it's a pretty recent occurrence here, planning opportunity. And I mention that because we have advisors out there that have clients that are in this position. They have potential taxable estate issues. And they're going to them and saying, hey, wait a minute. We have, what is it, like a $37 trillion federal debt rate now, while we're in a $1.6 trillion spending deficit, i.e. the debt's going to continue to climb in the near term at least. Taxes have to go up. Where are they going to go up? Well, we don't know, but the one thing we know is there's not a lot of charity out there for people in the taxable estate realm, and so there's some likelihood, maybe, depending on what administrations happen here in the future, that the estate tax exemption isn't always going to be this high, right? And so a lot of those advisors are going to clients and saying, hey, we have an opportunity to lock in that exemption amount now. And we do it with a relatively new form of trust called Spousal Limited Access Trust. Now, in my mind at least, those are most easily understood by comparing it to the typical trust scenario that most of you are familiar with. The typical trust scenario is, clients do their estate planning now, and their will or their living trust forms two trusts, right? At the death of the first spouse, the executor is told, okay, carve out up to my, if I'm the first spouse to pass away, carve out up to $15 million of our joint assets and put those into a B trust, the bypass trust, sometimes called the credit shelter trust. Into that trust, give my surviving spouse the rights to income from that, but the whole goal is to shift those assets and all their future accumulation down to our kids and grandkids free of estate tax. Surviving spouse has complete access to that trust, income and principal, if she wants, typically, is how that's set up. Well, a SLAT is doing the same thing, but we're doing it right now while everyone's still living. So both spouses are forming these irrevocable trust, right? To take advantage of the current estate tax exemption, you have to fund irrevocable trust. You have to give up control of those assets. Okay. Now, a lot of clients out there, especially in certain markets, are in a position like the folks in our next slide here. They're high earners. They're going to, it's fully expected they're going to have a taxable estate, but they don't have a lot of assets now, perhaps. And so here we have Simon, and Simon's a very high earner. Let's say Simon is the foremost intellectual property lawyer in artificial intelligence. So Simon's billing, 2 million a year, right? He's a high earner. Eden, because Simon's working 100 hours a week, Eden's at home taking care of the kids. Well, for Eden's, she's income beneficiary of Simon's SLAT. Well, what should we put in Simon's SLAT to assure that Eden has, because she isn't going to be working at least for the next probably 20 years, how can we set her up? And we can set her up with essentially a pension in the form of life insurance. So what we're doing here is Simon is going to take $20,000 and put into a variable universal life policy. That will give, he's doing it over a number of years, that will give Eden the ability, if she chooses to have, like I say, essentially a pension, $100,000 a year in her retirement years, in those 20 years of retirement, 65 to 84, right? And leave a death benefit whenever she passes away. So here's the math behind that. I'm sorry it's smaller, but we have to, of course, have the disclosures that fit on there and everything else. But here it shows his $500,000 going into the SLAT, which then invest inside that life insurance policy, from which Eden will withdraw $2 million, 20 years, $100,000 a year, and still leaving $1.3 million death benefit, right? And the reason, in my mind anyway, that this is such an opportunity for advisors is this. I have seen many, many clients when I would approach them and saying, we need to fund an irrevocable trust. All they can, they fixate on this. Nobody wants to give up access to their assets while they're living, right? They're fine with doing it after death. In fact, a lot of them, more so than men in my experience, don't really care what happens after they die. But they don't want to give up control while they're living. So in my mind, your opportunity here is to be able to go to especially attorneys, maybe CPAs, but the advisors in your market that are working with these high net worth clients and approaching them about funding spousal limited access trust. Go to those advisors and say, are you doing SLATs for your clients? Are you proposing SLATs for your clients? And they'll often say, well, yes, I am. And say, what is the number one objection that you get from your clients? And I guarantee you, this is going to be it. It's control, right? And say, well, what if you and I could partner up and say, we can take portions of that trust or whatever amount of that trust that they want to and put it into a life insurance policy where they can take income, tax-free income from it, no less. So you still have access to assets from that trust, but yet we've carved out whatever amount into this irrevocable trust to take advantage of the current very high unified credit amount, the amount exempt from estate tax. And so look at that. We're 11 minutes into it. So I am ready to take questions on that portion. Do we have any?
So, thank you, Kurt. Yeah. So this all sounds great so long as everybody's getting along. But what happens after you've created a SLAT and the spouses decide they don't like each other so much anymore and they're going to get divorced? How messy does it get? How do you get out of it? Can you provide uh, some some
Yeah,
advice on best practices and guidance as to I'm sure you've seen that situation before.
yeah. Yeah, not a lot surprisingly, because I gave some thought to that here a while ago when they told me about using life insurance and SLAT, and I'm trying to think through that because when I worked in insurance before, I mean, we were always having to deal with quadros on qualified money. I dealt with a lot of qualified money before, and it was and it just got so messy and contentious, and so the best advice, of course, is you don't you put all your eggs in one basket, as they say, and you can always unwind the life insurance in whatever method you want to. Unwinding the trust, by the way, would require two things. First, you have to go through a court process because it's an irrevocable trust. And so everyone that's named in the trust, every beneficiary named in the trust has to be able to speak their mind. So that's income and remainder beneficiaries. And they have to make their case as to what is a fair allocation of the assets that the trust holds. Then, of course, there's the IRS that has to be notified if there was any tax benefit derived from doing that. If you haven't died, there hasn't been any tax benefit derived from it, right? Because the SLAT was up to avoid estate tax. Um, you may have used up your gift tax exemption or part of it, and they would help. They would work with you on that. They always have in the past anyway. Where you would either get that back or you would name different people. So in this case, you'd say, well, my trust is going to name different beneficiaries, or you're going to say, we formed a new trust and these are the beneficiaries. Um, and so I haven't dealt with a real live case, believe it or not, with the SLAT that's been unwound as a result of divorce. But that's my initial thoughts. Anyone else have any comments or questions along those lines?
Well, my takeaway from your answer is that just like a divorce, it can be a little messy,
Going to be messy. Yep,
but there are solutions available. It's just
for
not easy.
sure. For sure. Yes.
I can jump in real
So
quick. Maybe another idea would be to have not reciprocal trusts because they can't be identical, obviously, but have a trust for him, a trust for her. If they get divorced, they're probably going to split assets 50-50 anyways, or some thereof.
Yep.
So conceivably, each can find themselves protected if you do two trusts, one for him, one for her, with obvious distinctions so that they're not mirror trusts.
Yep.
we do have another question, which is in your example, how much of the gift would have qualified for the annual exclusion?
So yeah, that was the one thing, for the sake of round numbers here, they use $20,000. The current gift annual gift tax exclusion is $19,000. So technically, he would use $1,000 of his lifetime. Currently, it's going to go over 19,000 next year. But anyway, that's a great question because I'm sure they focused on this and the fact that that does exceed the current annual gift tax exemption. So his gifts here would actually be $1,000 a year if the gift tax didn't go up, which again, it's going to go up, but that's a good question.
Okay. I don't see any more questions right now, so we can move on to the next topic. We
All
did
right.
have a question, which was a generic question of will these slides be made available? And I answered it privately, but for the sake of everyone else, the slides will be made available at the end of the presentation. We have one more question, sorry. Can the client use his unified credit?
Yes. So yeah, that's the other, we can go as deep into this as anyone wants to, but we're going to keep it relatively shallow for time purposes here. So yes, you have currently a $15 million exemption from estate and gift tax. Currently, the estate and gift tax exemption is unified. That's why they call it the unified credit against estate and gift tax. You might remember back in, what was it, 2011, 2012, they were decoupled and we had a higher estate tax and gift tax exemption. It was very messy. But we currently are back in an environment where the estate and gift tax exemption is $15 million. So he could make a gift of up to $15 million into this policy if he wanted to. Of course, that would leave him with nothing else that he could do for his, until the unified credit increased. Or what we're showing here is, like I said, the gift tax amount each year, $19,000 to any number of people. You don't even have to report that gift. So, here he would be using up 1,000 of his unified credit.
And then there was one more question before we move on to QTIPs, which is, and I believe this refers back to the previous question before the unified credit, which is, hold on one second. Why isn't that exempt since it is being quote unquote given to the spouse, unless the spouse is a non-US citizen?
Yeah, talking about the unlimited marital deduction,
Right.
I assume is what you're talking about. And so, yeah, currently it would be, husbands and wives are viewed as a single tax-paying unit, essentially, but by the tax code, as long as they're both U.S. citizens, as they indicated there. So yes, I'm using very generalized rules here, but yes, technically, any gift between husband and wife would be covered by the unlimited marital deduction. You have a smart group here. I'm going to stop using general rules and get very specific.
We absolutely do. Okay, I think we can move on to QTIPs.
All right. And this is one you might not have heard about. QTIPs are the second marriage trust. So I mentioned in the first part of this, that the typical situation is, and I think Gonzalo used the term, reciprocal trust. The typical non-blended family situation is he has a husband and wife and their estate planning documents, be it a will or living trust. Their terms mirror one another. And they say that at the death of the first spouse, carve out up to, as I mentioned, $15 million, give my spouse unlimited rights to all that. Well, QTIP trust puts a little variation on that because in this situation, we're talking about a blended family. And the kids are kids from a prior marriage. Okay. Why are we talking about this? This is, I'm not sure why this is so small. This is from Pew Research. Every day in the US, there are 1,300 new step families being formed. This is just astounding. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I know it was a big issue. That's why I put this together, but I didn't know it was as big as it is. 40% of the U.S. is blended families now. And it's been that way for the last 30 years. And why I bring this up is, or you put it in context for advisors, is that a huge part of maybe your current book and certainly of prospects out there are blended families. And it's a unique opportunity because there's some very unique planning that's necessary in these blended families. And especially where they're high net worth. As I say, in the typical non-blended family situation, you have the good old AB trust where each spouse's trust is fully accessible by the other spouse. In the blended family situation, the new spouse is going to be beneficiary or often beneficiary of what's called a C trust or the QTIP trust, where they have rights to income, but they don't control the remainder interest. The remainder interest is going to go to kids from the first marriage, right? So here's client, forms a B trust, maybe as a living, as a SLAT or at death, either way, and is able to utilize the other spouses, the spouse that didn't have as much assets, is able to utilize that spouse's lifetime unified credit to form a C trust, so long as there's various things, but the main one is she has rights to all the income from that trust for the rest of her life. And this presents this issue here. I've had lots of these in my career. These trusts just run out of money or they go down significantly. And any of you that use annuities or have used annuities in the past and have run illustrations, you know what I'm talking about here. When you show in an illustration, turning on income in year 1 versus turning on income in year 5 or 7 or 10, well, what happens with that year 1 illustration? Right? They run out of money at about year 12 or something, right? And so that's an even bigger issue in the trust world because of this. In addition to taking out all the income every year, trust can be kind of expensive. There's trust administration fees, there's portfolio management fees, and there's tax preparation, the fiduciary tax preparation fees. Those amount to about 1 to 200 basis points. If it's a $10 million trust, you're probably closer to the 1%. If it's a $2 million trust, you're probably closer to 2%. So there's those two things. And an even bigger issue for the remainder beneficiaries is this: trust income tax. Since 1993, irrevocable trusts have become a huge income tax target. They are by far, as a percentage, the biggest taxpayer, as a percentage of their assets, the biggest taxpayer. You and me, we hit the top tax bracket when we're making $626,000 of adjusted gross income. A trust hits the top tax bracket when they're making just over $15,000 of income. So pretty much every trust in January of every year is already in the top tax. The rest of the year, all their taxable return is going to be in the top tax bracket, which as of now, of course, is 37% plus the 4% Medicare surtax, right? If you have an investment income and you're in the top tax bracket, the Medicare surtax applies. And so, best possible case, long-term capital gains qualified dividends, that rate is 20%, right? Then you add on that 4% Medicare surtax. Best possible scenario is 24% of the long-term cap gains qualified dividends over 15,000 go to income tax, federal income tax. If it's an actively managed portfolio, there are short-term gains, ordinary income items, 41%. If there's any applicable state income tax, average nationwide now 7%, you're looking at almost a third of your preferential items go to pay income tax, and about half of your ordinary items go to pay income tax. Well, that's a bad deal for remainder beneficiaries. Making things really bad for trustees is this. Trustees, including, by the way, if you're managing money for any trustees out there, you had a family relationship or something that formed an irrevocable trust, you are held to the same standard too. You each have a fiduciary obligation to treat both income and remainder beneficiaries equally, i.e., trustee or investment manager, you can't load up the trust portfolio with municipal bonds, right? I mean, yeah, that produces a lot of income, but doesn't produce any capital appreciation for the remainder beneficiaries. You know, they're not going to inherit this trust for maybe 20 years. They fully expect that trust is going to go up in value to keep pace with inflation, right? Conversely, trustee, you can't load up the portfolio with small cap stock. Yes, tax efficient. Yeah, you're going to get capital appreciation, but there's no income, right? And so, is there a way for a trustee? Again, spouse is going to get income. She has to. The issue is what's going to be left for the remainder beneficiaries. And remainder beneficiaries, this sets up a very contentious situation, as you could probably imagine. Very often, one, they don't like stepmom. Two, stepmom might be the same age as they are or even younger. And three, they're seeing these $500,000 checks go out there every year and their value going down and down and down and down. And so, especially to deal with the tax bite, we look at using life insurance strictly for the taxation of gains within a trust. And so we set up a pretty common scenario here. Jason marries Angie. Jason has a successful business and has two kids from a prior marriage. They're using, let's see, they have a $20 million estate currently. $10 million goes into a QTIP trust, right? So $10 million, right? Going to sort of informally segregate that, say half of that trust, $5 million, we know should be earmarked for the kids, right? Trustee is going to put, let's see, what do we have here? $48,000 over the next 20 years into a VUL, right? Just to deal with the tax bite. If the trustee, they made these calculations and they say, using the net present value of this future interest, and does this calculation, $48,000 that, is going into these premium payments. If we were to just put $48,000 into our model portfolios with an average 6% growth each year, which was 100% long-term cap gains and qualified dividends over a 20-year period within that trust, that would yield $1.5 million, right? The death benefit on that amount, 48,000 over 20 years, produces $3.5 million. So another potential solution for part of that trust where, again, what we're looking for is to produce a reliable value for those remainder beneficiaries. Everybody knows what they're getting up front because these situations are as I say, very often they're very contentious situations. So that's just a way to potentially deal with some of that trust. So take some questions on that now, if I could, please.
Yeah. We had a question that came in which said, are lifetime marital QTIPs always non-grantor trusts so that a C Corp owner could put a portion of his C Corp stock in a lifetime QTIP and potentially stack the amount of Section 1202 modified small business stock exemption?
I have I would have to get back to them on that. I don't remember. I think we can make that work. They might have to revoke. I'm not sure. I'll have to get back to them on that. I have to apologize. I haven't done that in a long time.
That's okay. I will copy it and send it to you, and we can
Thank
get
you.
back to Mr. Landry. Thank you for the question.
Yes.
I do not see any other questions on Q-tips, so
Okay.
thank you. Moving on.
All right. Well, the next one is, something that is going to be, probably much more so in most of the wheelhouses of most advisors out there, because most of you have had some clients at least that have stock concentrations, right? My very first client, well, not my first client, my very first book of business when I got into the business in 2001, legacy book of business. Had a client, her name was Carlisle, and her dad worked for Merck in New Jersey. And he had gifted her a bunch of Merck stock. And she was about 60 whenever I became her advisor and had $1 million of Merck stock. It was one of those situations where, the worst of all possible worlds for an advisor. Big concentration, 100% one asset. Client wasn't very sophisticated. Client had married a retired Army colonel, Russ, and of course, retired military officers know everything. And so she wanted me to deal with Russ, not her, which I, legally couldn't do, um, or I should say, per our policy, couldn't do. Making matters even worse is, at least at that time, Merck was paying like, I can't remember, like an 8% dividend, right? And so they're getting these big dividends off this Merck stock. And for over the course of a couple of years, I kept going to them and saying, okay, yes, Russ, you have this nice, officer's pension out there, but this Merck stock is a huge concentration risk for you guys. We need to look at diversifying it. Well, they just couldn't wrap their head around that. The tax bite of it combined with, they'd be giving up, potentially giving up all this access or all the access to these big dividends. I just couldn't talk them into it. Well, then, a couple years later, the big Vioxx scandal comes along, right? And suddenly, overnight Merck stock goes down about 50%. Then I get the call from Russ saying, Kurt, I remember you mentioned one time, diversifying using this, charitable remainder trust and this wealth replacement trust strategy. Let's do that. I said, well, okay. And so we ended up doing it, but we ended up doing it with half the value that we would have had, a few months prior to that. And so anyway, you're very familiar with this risk here. Let me get rid of something here. There we go. It's a huge concentration risk, and it's something that clients just are reluctant to deal with. Like I say, anytime you're asking a client to give up something significant while they're still living, it's a big, it's just a difficult conversation to have. And so you can say, well, okay, we can diversify, but we'll still have market risk, right? And if we go into other assets, what if we could eliminate the market risk too? How do we do that? Well, you can do that with index universal life, because now your rate of return isn't based on the market; it's based on it's based on your life expectancy, right? So let's take, in fact, this kind of looks like a little bit like my couple there, Russ and Carlisle, about the same ages too. So let's say they have $4 million, and let's go to a picture. Pictures is always worth 1,000 words, right? So here's their stock, whatever company it is, Merck or whatever, $4 million of stock. You go to them and say, okay, if we slice off 25% of this, $1 million, we sell that today, long-term cap gains, you will net $700,000. If we put that into a survivorship index universal life policy, $3.5 million death benefit. One, that takes this portion anyway out of the market risk category, right? Two, we're taking, let's see, $4 million, $1 million sold plus the $3.5 million death benefit. That's $6.5 million. That gives you a share equivalent price of $143 versus $40. So that's the math you go through with the client and say, okay, what's the prospect, looking at this particular stock, what's the prospect that 40 is going to go to 143 in your lifetime, right? That's sort of the math that goes, as you're going through the sales concept. And then here it is laying it out with an illustration. Amounts of three and a half, well, actually almost $3.6 million death benefit, right? That is with a single premium, $700,000 single premium. Again, getting back to the, giving up control thing, if that's a concern for this client, you say, well, if that is a potential concern, if you think you might need to rely on those assets at some point, instead of doing a single premium, let's go into a 10 pay, eliminate the MEC concern, right? So here's the $700,000. We'll put that into a fixed account. Here's paying 4% and peel off 83,000 a year, right? That will go into the life policy. Obviously, when going from a single pay to a 10 pay, it reduces the death benefit, well, $110,000, but not a huge amount. But what that gives them, of course, is access to the policy now. They could, if they chose to, at some point, between now and that death benefit, they can take, tax-free loans out of that policy, right? Again, just giving them control where that is a potential objection from the client. And I think here's that being illustrated there. So, and again, this is another thing that, in my mind anyway, you can use as something that you can take to, where you can take an insurance solution to a market that you hadn't really considered before. And that is a stock contract. At least I had never thought about it before. And this is actually surprised the heck out of me. This has been one of our most utilized strategy here over the last, I don't know, Dave, my colleague Dave, who's been with Lincoln for I think 12 years. He said over the last 4 years, this has been our most popular advanced sales strategy, which sort of surprised me. So anyway, well, we did that in just 8 minutes. So we have an extra 2 minutes here. So why don't I take some questions on that, if you would, please, Kathy?
I do not see any.
Yeah, that one's kind of simple if you think about it. So
Uh, can you just put back up the handwriting slide?
yep, yeah, that's in my
I,
shot, that tells the whole story.
yeah, so let's just go over that one more time. I
Sure.
love this idea, and I think that people should really need to rethink where they can work this into their conversations with certain clients. So walk me through this one more time.
Sure, sure. So here, and here's their $4 million position now. It's $40 a share. They carve off 25% of it. Excuse me. They sell that. It's $1 million. They net $700,000 after tax, and they put that as a single premium into a survivorship index universal life policy. So they're starting with 4 million. They sell $1 million. Adding $3.5 million death benefit down the road would give them $6.5 million. Or if you divide that, and if you take these 100 shares and divide them to $6.5 million, you get a share equivalent price of $143. So you'd say, what's the prospect that the XYZ company, currently worth 40 is going to be worth 143 at your death? And that's, you don't have to go through that, but if they're asking for how'd you come up with this situation? I say, well, I just don't think we're going to get here. The other thing that I would say is when I was an advisor, we were never allowed to hold more than 10% in any particular position for one client. And, having 75% still isn't very diversified, in my opinion. And so I'd say, well, either we use this as a plan, a staged plan of diversification, and next year we sell another 25%, or we put 75% into a charitable remainder trust and sell that, or if this particular stock is eligible for an exchange fund, we put part of it in that. This is just, in my mind anyway, part of the conversation. This wouldn't be the full conversation.
Yeah, the thing that excites me most about this concept is if you think about how well generally the market has done over the past oh so many years. And I don't know, someone's ringing a doorbell, it sounds like. But in any event, The market, there so many people have done so well in the market, and this is a way to um, take advantage of that and accelerate on your gains, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we're hearing a lot of that kind of talk right now. As the market topped out, stuff like that. And so, yeah, that's that's a great point, Kathy. If and and especially if you're 60 years old, right? Maybe it is time to cash out. And how can we do that more tax efficiently?
We do have a question, Kurt, which says, does this concentrated stock presentation or opportunity, does this generally compare favorably to gifting all or a portion of the stock to a charitable remainder trust, getting the deduction, avoiding cap gains at least immediately, and using the income from the CRT to gift to an islet?
Yep, that's someone was reading ahead there. That's exactly what I started to talk about here is, that is far and away my favorite strategy for diversification and I've done it numerous times with many different clients, is finding a CRT and then using portions of that. And in fact, I, leverage that even a little bit more if the client's somewhat younger, i.e. less than 70. I'll do a net income makeup CRT where you're actually deferring for the first several years and then turning on income later. And you're using part of that income to fund, as I say, an islet. I love that strategy. And this would not be, in most cases, as efficient as that. But what's the objection of that? Well, of the CRT strategy. One, well, a significant portion is going to a charity, right? Some people are cool with that, some people are not. So that's when you could say, either, we're going to pivot to this life insurance part here, or we're going to put part of it in life insurance. Um, again, this is just potentially part of a solution, but the CRT strategy I love. We have some pieces on that, I believe. I haven't used them yet, but yes, if they want to talk about that, I'm happy to do that on another call.
Um, Thank you, Kurt. We are almost 45 minutes in. I don't see any other questions. If anybody has a question, please type it into the Q&A. The presentation will be available. The recording will also be on our website. I'm not seeing any further questions. So before we conclude, I would like to turn this over to Lisa Mitchell to talk about some upcoming webinars that Agency One is going to be hosting during the month of September. Lisa?
Can everybody hear me? Good,
Yes.
good. Okay, thank you. Thank you for attending. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, John. On September 11th, we've got a webinar hosted by Mass Mutual, featuring information on their Universal Lifeguard SUL, UL and SUL product. They'll go over details about that. Randy Zipsey is going to be the speaker. He's the advanced sales for Mass Mutual strategic distributors. So that is certain to be a good webinar. Make sure to register for that if you're available. September 18th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, we have Pacific Life discussing strategies to optimize business. Speaker is going to be Carlin Snipes. September 25th, we've got John Hancock again for their part 5 of their You're the Boss Life Insurance Solutions for Business Owners. And this is going to feature guaranteed issue solutions for key executives. And again, Mark Berry will be back to speak on that. And then finally, on September 30th, we have one of our partners, CCB, Capital Commonwealth Brokerage. They're going to be discussing life settlement, the current trends, and market updates. And that will be presented by Drew Griffo and Steve Ruggieri. And that will round out September. So look for additional invitations going out for each one of those webinars, and we hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So, Kurt and John, on behalf of Agency One, thank you for your knowledge and your insight and for sharing with the Agency One and the BSMG advisors that are on the phone. If Agency One can be of any help in any way with your case design, illustrations, underwriting, anything that you've got going on in your practice, please reach out to myself, Gonzalo, your case managers, Dennis Bartos or Julie Melendez, or your friends at BSMG. We are all here, happy to help, and we are hoping that we are going to end the year very strong with both our friends at Lincoln and the other carriers as well. So thank you for your attention and your time this afternoon. And we are going to end this webinar now. So again, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.